welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Christine Madsen. I'm a first-year DPhil here at the Oxford Internet Institute. And welcome to our, I think this is our second Internet and Society seminar that we've held this year. A little bit of business. These are sort of an irregular but ongoing seminar session that we're holding. So I'm going to pass around a sign-up list, and if anybody would like to put their email address down to receive further updates, please feel free to put that down. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Bob Stein here today. Bob is founder and co-director of the Institute for the Future of the Book and founder of the Voyager Company, which was the first commercial CD ROM company, I believe. For 13 years, he also led the development of the Criterion Collection, which, for those of you who may not know, is a series of over 300 definitive films that were produced on digital media. These were, I think, the first films ever to include audio commentary, weren't they? And incidentally, were the only reason I owned a television for many years, and the only reason that I bought a Laserdisc player. Bob has also worked with Alan Kay at the research group at Atari on a variety of electronic publishing projects. And 11 years ago, he started Night Kitchen to develop authoring tools for the next generation of electronic publishing. And that is the work that's now being continued at the Institute for the Future of the Book. So thank you very much for coming, Bob.
My pleasure. I'm here in the UK half time now. I'm a fellow at LSE and have the Institute for the Future of the Book that I work for now has a whole London group as well. And I can tell you about some of our projects here in the course of this. I just got off the plane from Los Angeles about an hour ago. I did manage to sleep for 9 hours on the plane, but that was because of a little pill that I took. I'm just about really awake. I won't nod off, but the more that you sort of ask questions as they occur to you, the more it'll probably keep me awake, and we'll have a good discussion. This is a variant of a talk I've been giving for a while, which sort of shows the sort of, I've actually been involved in thinking about new media, I'm almost embarrassed to say, since about 1979, and pretty much full-time and working in this area since then. And there's sort of an arc of discovery, and that's interesting, it turns out, and that's sort of what this talk is about, although I'm mostly trying to sort of draw the general out of the particular. Prologue is goes like this. Arthur Koestler, you probably know of him for the more famous book that he wrote called Darkness at Noon. It was a novel. He also wrote this nonfiction history of the early astronomy called The Sleepwalkers. And in this book, he refers to something which he called the book that nobody read. And the book that nobody read, supposedly, was Copernicus' De Revolutionibus, which is the book in which Copernicus said it was actually the Earth moving around the sun and not vice versa. Fast forward n number of years, and a Harvard astronomer, Owen Gingerich, is in Trinity Library in Dublin, and he somehow gets his hands on a first edition of De Revolutionibus, and he opens it up, and he notices that the left-hand side, that's the book, and the right-hand side are all these margin notes. And he sort of ticks off in his head, that's interesting, nobody read it, but there's all these notes in the margin. And he decided to make it a hobby over the next 20 years to look at every single first or second edition of the Revolutionibus that he could find. And it turns out that they almost all have extensive margin notes. And not just sort of margin notes by one reader, they often have margin notes by several readers. There's actually a conversation, Talmud style, going on in the pages of the book. And I love the fact that not only did nobody read it, but it was extensively read and commented on, and this idea that the conversation was captured in the margin of the book is which turns out, as you'll see later in this talk, it's a big theme in our work now. I love the fact that it's not at all new, and it was happening. It's always happened, basically. At least it happened up until the time when sort of print took off, and books became slightly less scarce. So this particular journey started for me at about this time. It's about 1980, and I'm walking into a laboratory at MIT, and at the media, what's now the Media Lab, was then the Architecture Machine Group Lab.
The definition of these words is by touching them. The definition will appear.
Can you make it any louder? So you have to appreciate this is 1980. Up until I'm a publisher, a book publisher, and at the time we had never seen any text on a screen that was worth reading. It was always white, versed out, white on black, or sometimes it would be that horrible green on black, but nothing you would actually want to. It didn't resemble a book page in any way. You would never think of reading expository text on a screen. And admittedly, this video doesn't capture it well, but you've got to trust me. When I walked in and saw this on the TV screen, not a computer screen, in 1980, it blew my socks off. It was really exciting to see. They had just invented what they called fuzzy fonts at MIT, that we now all call anti-aliasing, anti-aliased fonts. But if that wasn't enough, then this happened.
Get back to the illustration, but in this case it's not a single frame, but it's actually a movie of someone coming into the frame and doing the repair that's described in the text.
So this was like a major aha moment for me, because suddenly that page that for all my life had contained words and pictures suddenly could contain audio and video. And it was very much in the sense that it was in a page. I mean, I guess the early real sort of conceptual breakthrough that I made that sort of carried me for a long time was I was very lucky. I got hired by the Encyclopedia Britannica at this point to sort of spend a year thinking about the future of the Encyclopedia. And I wrestled for a long time with sort of what the essence of this thing is, to try to understand what it was we were going to lose and what we needed to keep if we brought this with us into the electronic domain in some way. And I realized that at a certain point I said, okay, I'm going to stop thinking about the book in terms of its physical nature. I'm going to stop thinking about it as ink on bound pages. I'm going to start to think about it in terms of how it's used. And I realized that a book is the one medium where the user, at the time anyway, where the user was in complete control of the sequence and the pace at which they access the material. If I want to read page 55 6 times, I can do that. If I want to skip back to page 28, it happens almost instantaneously. Today we would call this a random access medium, and that's where a lot of its power comes from, in addition to its portability. So I started calling books user-driven media. And in contrast to all the 20th century media, movies, television, radio, which I started calling producer-driven, because at the time, you went to the movie theater, you sat in a chair, 2 hours got beamed at you, and you left. You bought a record, and basically, the stereo was over on the other side of the room, you listened to it. Certainly the radio was producer-driven. But what I realized that what was going to happen inexorably was that as you put microprocessors into the mix, that we would be transforming these producer-driven media into user-driven media. And that suddenly, when we put a movie onto a video disc, which was quite different than videotape, freezing the frame was simple and clear. You could scan backwards and forwards instantaneously, like with a book. You could play a scene over and over again. You could do it in slow motion. All these things added up to my becoming. I could suddenly start to read a movie the way I read a book, in terms of the active the active role of the reader wrestling with the material, because the way that the material is being presented to you affords reflection. When you can stop something, you can think about it. So I basically got excited about a new kind of publishing where authors would be free to use whatever media type was best suited for a particular point that they wanted to make. Where there would be mixing and matching audio, video, text, and pictures. And so I sort of took this insight and
Speed control that allows me to.
Took this insight and started publishing things. And the Orson Welles in the middle, that was sort of the first video disc, and that with King Kong was the other one, and we were the first people to do second soundtracks and supplementary sections, all the things you now know to be sort of a standard DVD. And we started to do the same things with music, and I'll show you that in a second, or a history book where we didn't just take sort of the surface contents, we sort of added all the backstory, because we thought that would enable the reader to, the really interested reader, to sort of have a much more full involvement with the subject matter. Malcolm X was one of the first electronic books that we did in the early 90s. So here's an example. This is circa 1989. This was done on a Macintosh Classic, so 640 by 480, no gray screen, even no grayscale, just black and white. It's about Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, everything you ever wanted to know about Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. This is a promo for it, it's not the actual program.
In Stravinsky, Rite of Spring, renowned music scholar Robert Winter takes you inside the work that marked the beginning of the modern age in music.
If you've ever seen Walt Disney's Fantasia, then you've heard the music of Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring accompanying lumbering dinosaurs. And if you've seen the movie Jaws, then you've heard the influence of Stravinsky's style in The Rite on leading film composers like John Williams. Indeed, it's hard to imagine what 20th century culture would be like if this work had never been written.
Winter's insightful commentary includes a continuous, real-time explanation of each passage, with options for listening to the instruments in the orchestra individually. Winters also introduces you to the musical concepts behind the Rite of Spring, using a variety of creative techniques.
I actually like showing this particular piece, this aspect, because it's the perfect example of sort of not having to deal with the lowest common denominator anymore in a motion picture audio situation. This is actually extremely hard to understand what he's talking about here. It's the unit pulse. It's the shortest rhythmic unit in the Rite of Spring. I actually had to listen to this about 10 times before I actually understood what he was doing, but I could do that. And that was, to me, it was the perfect example of what it meant to add this kind of functionality to a book where the reader was in control.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2.
And when you're finished with the program, up to 4 players can test their knowledge of Stravinsky by playing the right game.
Anyway, we went on to make a lot of things. We made, we did 300 movies, we did 75 fantastic CD ROMs, we had more like 100 CD ROMs, and then about 75 electronic books in about a 12, 13-year period. And it was all from the point of view of multimedia was the important development within the publishing world. I'm going to step back a before I tear that apart, I'm going to step back and show you a few pictures from 1981 when I was working with Alan Kay at Atari, and we wanted to make this encyclopedia. We wanted to build a consortium of people to do the great intelligent encyclopedia of the future, and we had to convince our bean counters at Time Warner that owned Atari this was a good idea. So we commissioned a Disney animator, Glenn Keane, to draw some scenarios that we just defined for him of people using the encyclopedia. And I just want to show you three of them. These are children at the Museum of Natural History, and they're walking around the museum with little terminals that basically give them access to the archive of the encyclopedia, and they're asking questions as they occur to them. And the wall panels that you see, those are large screen televisions, and the little boxes underneath them are also terminals into the encyclopedia, so the kids can query the what's on the wall and go deeper and sort of follow their own interests and questions. This is a mother in Laguna Beach on a tide pool with two of her daughters, and they're looking into the tide pool and wondering what they're seeing there, and they're asking the encyclopedia, trying to get answers. I do notice that this terminal has an antenna on it, implying that they were doing this wirelessly, which sort of shocks me because in 1981 it was way before the age of the cell phone. But I guess we'd figured that out by then. This is a teacher in Tokyo teaching her class about Western architecture, while a professor, architect in New York, is studying Japanese motif for a building he's working on. We put these two on the same drawing just because they were both architecture related, not, and this is the point of showing you all of these, not because it ever occurred to us for a nanosecond that the people who are looking at these things in the encyclopedia might have some reason to talk to each other. In not one of these scenarios, not one, was there any sense that locating vast amounts of intellectual content in a dynamic network would give rise to the people using that network actually being in touch with each other. It was all, and I know it sounds absurd to be saying this, but all we thought of was, I as an individual go to the terminal, I go see what I want, I take it off. For me, there was no sense that there'd be any value of having people on the network. We completely missed it, just completely. I'm sure there's a whole other category of people who totally didn't miss it, but those of us who were working in the multimedia field, and even in the in the computer labs like Alan's, was not being talked about. So let me a little introduction to the next bit. So I left Voyager actually in 1996 because I felt strongly that, as wonderful as this multimedia stuff we were making was, that it was really hard to make stuff. Like that Stravinsky that I showed you, that took a world-class programmer a year to program. We did a great project with Stephen J. Gould from Harvard, and the way that project would work was Stephen came in, sat around a table like this for several days. We talked about what might go on the CD ROM. We shot this fantastic film of him giving a basic 1-hour lecture on Darwin and evolution. And then Stephen went away for a year while a programmer and a graphic designer knitted it all together. And A, it was too expensive, but B, what I really couldn't stand was that Stephen wasn't involved in the development of this during the key creative times. And I really felt that if we were going to have a electronic publishing culture that was diverse and as rich as the print publishing culture, we had to change things. We had to give authors, and I use that word broadly, much more powerful tools that they could use themselves to at least generate first drafts the way they do with text. And so I decided I would devote myself for a while to building a set of tools, which I did. They weren't bad tools, except Microsoft was my partner, and when it came time to bring them to market, they said I had to drop the Macintosh version. And I was ornery enough to say no.
What happened?
Pardon?
What happened then?
It just became an orphan.
Really?
Yeah. It wasn't quite good enough in some ways, though, so I don't mind. I mean, there are a couple of schools in the States where teachers and their students did amazing stuff, but it didn't actually ever go anywhere. Although it's still available, you can still download it. People still do. I find that there are a lot of people in there. A lot of retired people have downloaded the software and are building their memoirs in it. But about 5 years ago, the MacArthur Foundation came to me and said, we really like that work you did at Voyager. We'd like to give you a huge pot of money to do something. What would you like to do? And I said, I'd like to start a new press. And they said, well, we weren't thinking about that. What else do you want to do? I said, what were you thinking of? They said, well, we were thinking maybe you would redo Who Built America 10 years later. And I said, yeah, that wouldn't be interesting to me because I don't do one-offs and what would I do next after that one? And they said, well, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'd like to start the Institute for the Future of the Book. And they said, what would that be about? And I said I wasn't sure yet, but trust me. So they did, and they gave me a lot of money. And I went out. First, I went and hired a bunch of really smart young people who had just graduated from Harvard and Yale in literature. And we sat around a table like this for a year and just talked. And it was sort of fun because they were sort of fascinated by the work I had done, and I was completely enchanted with their embrace of the internet in a much deeper way than I had at that point. And I think we all had some sort of instinct that if we could find some way to synthesize our experience, we'd get somewhere interesting. And first breakthrough came when we did a project. Christo's Gates came to New York, and we didn't live that far from there, and it was a big deal for us. We spent a lot of time in the park and quite loved it. And on the last day of the exhibit, I had this bad dream that I had been made a judge of a competition to choose the best photograph of the Gates. And what we had gotten were 3 million orange photographs. And but I had spent that last day also, though, with the woman who's the head of the design department at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. And Rebecca was pointing out as we walked through that there was literally no view in the park where the Gates were the same. It was a fantastically varied visual scape. And so we decided sort of after the fact, we made a call to people to submit their photographs to a Flickr site that we set up. And the idea was we were going to make an archive and let people go in and make their own edits of the Gates. And we called this the networked book we had in mind. The experiment was a horrible failure because Flickr at that time, we got fantastic photographs. The quality and the diversity of photographs we got was stunning. But it turned out that Flickr's tools at that time didn't let you tag anybody else's work. You could only tag your own work. So it was sort of useless. But we had our feet wet, and we had this sort of meme of the networked book. Just before that had happened, I had gone to I'd gone up to Cornell to give a talk to a group of librarians, and I had with me this wonderful book, conference proceedings of a conference that Echo and Nunberg had done in the earlier 90s. And I read this fantastic essay by Carla Hess. She's an historian at Berkeley, in which she basically talks about the fact that the idea of an author as someone who owns her own ideas and puts them into a book, et cetera, was fairly recent, that actually arose with capitalism and the Enlightenment, and that before that, it's not how it worked. Ideas didn't seem to be owned in that same authorial way. There's much more to that, but that together with other things made it. I was sitting there on the bus, and I sort of went, oh, it's all about the network. I realized that segue from what I said about her, it's all about the network, doesn't exactly make sense, but trust me, there's a lot there, and it did happen on that bus because of reading that article. And so we then embarked on a series of experiments of networked books. And the first one we did, I think, let me see if I'm actually live on the internet here. Let me see if I could be live on the internet. Okay, well, we're live. I wonder what I couldn't find. MITCHEL. CPHS. Okay, so the first one was this. This was Mitchell Stevens, professor at NYU. We're having lunch with him one day about a book he wrote called The Rise of the Word, Rise of the Image, The Fall of the Word, which I couldn't stand the book, but I wanted to talk to him about it. I couldn't stand it. I just disagreed with it profoundly because it reduced the value of words in a way I thought didn't make sense. But in the course of this, he mentioned that he was about to write a book about the history of atheism, which he didn't know anything about. And had gotten a contract, was going to spend a year doing research on it. And I said to him, so that's great. Would you consider doing this in public? Would you consider, we'll make you a blog. As you do your research, ask questions, tell people what you're doing, and let's see what happens. So over the course of a year, Mitch started this, this is the end of the blog, but and every day or more than one time a day, he would, write a little post like this, still thinking of the rather large question of method in historical and social science. Research, spoke with a colleague today, hope there's interest, and he gets 6 comments here. He gathered over the course of a year a coterie of future readers who wanted to engage with him as he did his research. It was tremendously important to him in informing his work every step of the way. So if you think, here's his book, which isn't out yet, but so this blog represents a lot of the stuff that went on before he wrote it. So the process of the author's synthesizing of his ideas. The next project was McKenzie Walk. And let me get the real thing up here. I think the last time I gave this talk, I didn't have access to internet, and I turned off the links. I know most of these addresses. McKenzie Walk is a professor at the New School. He's a philosopher. I'll read the book. Here, maybe? I don't want Gamer Theory 2.0. I want Gamer Theory 1.0. Okay. Ken's a philosopher at the New School. He wrote a book called The Hacker Manifesto, which Harvard had published. We were having lunch with Ken. He tells us he's doing a new book about the critical theory of video games. And we asked him would he consider putting it online, letting us publish it online. He didn't have a deal for it yet with MIT or Harvard. And he said sure. And many people think that the innovation here is this left-hand side where each one of these cards is a paragraph. But that's not the case. The reason it looks that way is that Ken writes in paragraphs. He doesn't write pages. This book has 9 chapters. Each chapter has 5 sections. Each section has 5 paragraphs. So these are the first 5 paragraphs of section 1 of chapter 1. The innovation was that we took the comments that you usually see in a blog and we moved them from below into some scrolling field or whatever. We moved them up next to Ken's text. Within hours of this being put online, the right-hand margin started to be populated with a conversation. Here, so in this card 5, there are 30 comments here. Ken played an active role in the conversation, and it helped tremendously to inform the final book that Harvard did publish. Well, the early reviewers all said the same thing. It's no longer the author speaking, it's now the book speaking. Because the conversation in the margin became an inherent, intrinsic, crucial part of the text. I often found Ken's writing is extremely dense and complicated. I would actually often read the comments before I read his text as to give me a window into how to read the text. One thing we found was that, especially looking at Ken's role in the conversation, was that the result of this format had a serious flattening effect on the hierarchy that we normally see in print. In print, where the author is up there in the ivory tower and the readers are somewhere out there, that hierarchy goes away pretty quickly when the author and the readers are in there mixing it up together right on the page of the book. And I don't say it flattens it, I say it has a flattening effect. Ken became, as author, he became much more like a seminar leader. The person who chooses the subject, knows more about it than anybody else in the room does, is responsible generally for the tenor of the discussion and the pace of the discussion, but who fundamentally trusts the other people in the room to engage with the material in a way that's going to be of value to the group. I might as well say this here. I think that between Ken's project and several that have come since, I have a sense now, one of the new ways that I think about authors is that sort of the definition of an old school author is somebody who engages with a subject matter on behalf of future readers. You go to the library and you do whatever you do. You read other people's books and you think about stuff, and but your readers are several orders of remove, and you're engaging with subject matter on behalf of this anonymous group that you think someday will take up your work. I now think of future authors, and this is a transitional period. Not everybody's just going to be this way next week. This may be 10, 15 years from now. But I think we will begin to think of authors as people whose commitment is not to engage. If the old school's author's commitment is to engage with subject matter on behalf of readers, new school authors, their commitment will be to engage with readers in the context of the subject matter. That it will be assumed that engaging with readers is the whole point. And you do it in the context of a particular subject matter that's of interest. So if the work we did with Mitch Stevens sort of is about what happens here with the book, and what happened with Ken is what happens here after the book is written in terms of the conversation that the book engenders, you might think of our work as sort of extending the boundaries of the book to include both what happens before it gets published and what happens after it gets published. It actually turns out to be a little more complicated than that. One of the things is that what we've discovered is that when you take the contents of this thing and reify them in this object, in this printed frozen object, it tends to obscure the social relations that underlie it. The fact that John Berger read a lot of books before he did this, spoke to a lot of colleagues, had a lot of experiences in life that he was synthesizing. All that sort of is missing in an overt way from the book, and certainly whatever conversation that it engendered, some of it may be in newspapers or radio shows, but in general it's out there in the ether. It's not captured here. So that what we have found is that as we have started to bring serious intellectual content into a dynamic space on the internet, is that the social relations come forward, and you start to see reading and writing not as sort of those when we grow up, and if the image of the child curled up on the couch or in bed with a book as a solitary experience, or the experience of the author alone in her garret writing, we now start to see these as social experiences, which we didn't before. Actually, I have a couple of pictures here. I want to show them here. I think they're the perfect time to show them, or at least one. This was a few in November. I was talking to this woman working at the Guardian, who described this behavior of her 10-year-old son. So he'll be reading a book. He'll put the book down and go to the book's website. Then he'll check what other readers are writing in the forums, and maybe leave a message himself, and then return to the book. He'll put the book down again and Google a query that's occurred to him. I think that most of us think of this as reading. And I would prefer now to redefine reading as all of these behaviors. In other words, when he went to the book's website and started putting comments in there for his about the book with his colleagues, to me that's now part of sort of a broader definition of what a reading experience is. When he goes to Google and is following something that the book makes him think, gee, I wonder if, and he goes to Google to get an answer, that to me is part of being an active a reader. And I think that the more that we're able to redefine reading as having the full, the sort of full range, the more we'll be able to design reading experiences which are in keeping with the potential of the dynamic net. Where are we? I want to show you a couple more of these examples. This is again the sort of the thing we did for Ken Walk, the gamer theory. That was a hack of WordPress, and people really liked it and they wanted to use it, but they didn't all want to write in paragraphs, and they didn't want to always use text that were broken up that way. So we did a further hack and developed something called Comment Press, which is actually available. It's public domain. It's free. It's open source. This is a class in the University of North Carolina. That's a story by Ambrose Bierce from the Civil War, occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. This is a page of the story. You'll see in paragraph 17, there are all these comments on the right-hand side. There was also a video version that the teacher wanted to include, so it's broken up with clips from the video version and the text. In the course of a week, the students put in over 500 comments and had a very extensive conversation in the margin of the book. This is a high school in New York. A section on Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and again, students are having an extensive conversation. I'm just showing you this because the teacher said this fantastic thing. She said, what's happening is the boundaries of the classroom are completely changing. She said, we have a discussion, we're in class, we have a discussion in class. The kids go home, they open up the book at home, and they continue the conversation in the classroom in the margin of the book at home. They come back to school in the morning, the conversation keeps going. The conversation just flows back and forth from home to school seamlessly. Very incredibly exciting for us to hear this. Okay, I'm going to sort of give you three. I'm going to give you three conclusions. They're mostly in the forms of questions here, and then if there's just a little bit of time left, I'd like to show you some of Sophie, if I could, which is a new piece of software that we've been developing for the last 5 years, which I think is going to have an interesting impact on the ability to create rich multimodal documents in the context of the network. The network books we've shown you, like where the classes are using it, or some of limited subject interest, like Ken Wark's gamer theory, those work okay. The conversations they're threaded and they work. we have no idea how to have a threaded, complex conversation if there are tens of thousands or millions of people involved. It's just so far beyond our ken, but we've got to figure that out. When I did the same day that I was going, when I went to Cornell to give that talk, I started a little thought experiment. If Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto today and published it on the web in such a way that readers could leave their comments, and everybody who wrote big books and essays could link back in, that over the course of 150 years, you wouldn't have a 50-page essay, you'd have a corpus of millions of pages. In fact, we do have a corpus of millions of pages of the Communist Manifesto. It's just that there's no way to put it all together. But going forth, one imagines we're actually going to be able to put it all together. The question becomes, how do you enable that conversation? How do you enable people? No one person, unless we find some really fantastic prostheses, no one person is going to be able to read even a small part of that corpus of that one book. So how are we going to enable people to find the part of it that's important to them? How are we going to have discussions about subject matters that are too large now for anyone to understand? This to me is what I mean is the most interesting sort of conceptual problem we've got. That it's not just that there's too much stuff for each of us to understand. It's that we don't even know how to have a conversation anymore because we can't get to the meta spot. Because none of us has enough of a view to get to the meta spot, so where we can say, all right, of all the 15 million bits on this table, those are the 6 that we actually need to look at. We need mechanisms of visualization. We need the machines to find some way to help us. But the question in my mind is, how do we get the machines to help us rather than getting us to help them? And this doesn't follow on exactly, but it's the question people always ask me about if things are always in process. Which I think when you put books onto the network, why shouldn't they always stay in process? What does that imply for notions of versions and authority? And my most radical answer is it means we won't care so much about versions and authority anymore. We'll take our lives don't have versions. We have snapshots. We have boxes of snapshots that remind us of key moments of our life. I think we will find some way to take snapshots of intellectual, of knowledge as it flows. What the form of those snapshots will be, I don't know, but that's a much more important. Rather than think about how do we capture everything, because that's not going to be possible. The real question is, how do we capture what's important, and how do we give ourselves ways back into it? And fundamentally, the question from all of this is, what does it mean to be human in the age of the digital network? Because coming out of the Enlightenment, our sense of the human with the individual being sort of the highest level of what the individual is everything. My sense is we're going to have to learn new, profoundly different ways of collaborating, where individuals are not going to be as important as groups, and how we're going to, whether that's a 200, 500, or 10,000 year shift, I don't know, but it's going to be different. We've come to a real interesting sort of transitional point in human history. I need to take your advice on something. I would actually love to show Sophie, but I also, if people would just rather talk about what we've talked about so far,
I can see Sophie, don't we?
Yeah, I think we can do. Do you know what time?
We should start questions at
Okay, so we have 15 minutes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, I think you have time.
Make a quick Sophie demo. Let me get a few things out here quickly. You were looking at Sophie. That was Sophie, by the way, although it wasn't doing anything interesting that PowerPoint or Keynote couldn't do. Let me just get out about 4 things. And Mothlight. And Naomi Klein. And Mozart. Okay, so books. So the purpose of Sophie is to make it possible for ordinary people to assemble rich media documents that, by the way, have the same commenting function that you saw on the web pages, without having to hire programmers or learn Flash. The form of everything I'm going to show you is very similar. You've seen things like this forever. Nothing I'm going to show you took more than minutes or hours to make. That's what's important. This is just an edition of Allen Ginsberg's Howl. If I started to play, he'll read it. The pages will turn.
I saw
the poem is on a timeline, so it knows where it is. So if I go to page 3 and start playing,
who chained themselves to subways for the endless
etc. Here's an edition of Macbeth. You get the definitions of words like you'd expect to get. You can also get the Royal Shakespeare Company's recording that you can listen to. The pages will turn. You can also get here, for example, Act 1, Scene 2. Here's how Wells represented it. Here's how Polanski represented it. Here's how Kurosawa. Again, nothing unusual about that, but it took somebody a few hours to make. I show this just because this is a colleague wrote an essay on Stan Brackage's Mothlight. It's just an ordinary essay, but he decided he would actually put the film itself underneath the essay. I'm not suggesting this is the way you would read, but I think it's really interesting from 2 perspectives. One, that he could make such a close connection between the essay and the subject of the essay, and also what I love about Sophie is that it's playful enough that he could sit there and say, "Oh, gee, I wonder if I could do that," and he could do it really easily. Here's Naomi Klein, her essay on. A speech she gave on the shock doctrine.
I'm going to be talking about disaster capitalism.
So that's just her talking, and she reads the whole piece. But over here, there is a comment field that's all screwed up because of something I did earlier. Well, I'll show you. I'll show you this somewhere else. And here's one just another one for fun. This is. My colleague put 20 versions of Wichita Lineman. And you can play them all together. Okay, so let me make. Now I need to make a couple things for you so you can actually see how easy this is. Let's see if I actually quit Sophie. Will I get back a better window I can actually work in? I'm going to make something very, very quickly for you, I promise. Let's pretend first that I'm a teacher and I'm going to make a little module for my class. I want them to compare those 3 different versions of Act 1, Scene 2 of Macbeth. So I'm going to get a new book. And I'm going to go get some things to put in that book. I think they're here. And, okay, so here's the Kurosawa. Here's the Kurosawa. Here's the Polanski. Here's the Wells. And I'm going to select all of these I'm going to line them up vertically, and then I'm going to enlarge them a little bit. And then I'm going to go get a little text frame here. And I'm going to say in here, please compare and contrast these 3 readings of, forget the typing, there's a spell checker. Scene 1, Act 2 of Macbeth in the comment field below. And then I'm going to go get a, let me put this up here. I'm going to go get a comment field. I'm going to put that here. And let's resize this a little bit. And then I'm going to go get a color here on the page. And then I would go up here and I would save this book to Sophie's server. And when it's there, the students will start to download it. They can look at the movies. And then they can add a comment. And I can write in here, Bob, Kurosawa rocks. And I commit that. And then anybody in the class who's reading the book will see that comment. They can reply to my comment. Hank, you're nuts. Or they can make a new comment. And I will tell you, I remember the first time I was reading, we would put Vannevar Bush's As We May Think into a book, and I was reading it, I was showing this to a colleague in New York, and suddenly a colleague in Paris, a comment from him pops up in the margin of the book. And I mean, literally, my God, all chilled. I mean, because you know, I'm old. This has always been frozen. And to suddenly see a comment show up dynamically on the page of a book while I'm reading it, it was awesome. And I suddenly realized, oh my God, I'm going to be reading books with my grandchildren synchronously or asynchronously. You know, I'll be leaving them little notes in the margin. They'll leave little notes for me. I'll be able to have a book club with my 6 favorite kids from college who we live all over the world now. And we'll be able to do it, you know, live like this. Because we'll be able to have audio and video in here eventually, not next week. And then I'll show you, I'll make another thing. I'm going to make a book. Show off Sophie's timeline capability. This is where it gets pretty interesting here. I'll make the page yellow. And I'm going to bring in a text frame here at the bottom. And I'm going to set that text frame over here. And I'm going to say that I want... let me see if this is actually going to work. I think I need to bring this up here a little bit. I'm sorry, I'm sort of stymied by the projectors taking over my screen here. Let's try this way. Okay. So I'm going to set this, I want this to be 48 points, and I want it to be brown, and I want it to be centered, and I'm going to save this as caption style. And so I've now established a style on this, and I'll put it back down here in the middle. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say, I want to save this as my default page template. And then I'm going to take my default page template, which I've now saved, and I'm going to make myself a couple pages. That music stuff you saw where we had the running commentary, that requires time-based events, and that's what I'm showing off here. It's a really important new addition in our vocabulary. So I'm going to go get some stuff to put in here, this timeline demo, and I'm going to start on page 2, and I'm going to put this picture from the gates out here, and Turn off the frames. We're going to call this blue reflection. And then on the next page, we're going to put this one, and we're going to call this one Lots O Orange. And which we're going to spell wrong. And here we're going to put a movie. And we're going to put movie here. And the movie, we're going to tart it up a little bit. We're going to put a 20 pixel border on it. And we're going to put a bunch of shadow on it. And we're going to set the shadow more like that. And then we're going to go get a timeline. Now first we're going to get a non-flowing text frame. And that's going to say on it, click here, and we're going to select that, and we're going to say make that 48 points. And we're also going to say on mouse up, we want to open a URL, and the URL we're going to open is www.yahoo.com. And then we're going to take this and we're going to put it on top of the movie. And then we're going to go get a timeline, single page timeline. And the first thing we're going to bring to the timeline is the movie itself. And drag this little clock down onto the timeline. I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. Then I'm going to go get the little piece of text. I'm going to put the text on the timeline. I'm going to change its duration. I'm going to put it here. I'm going to make 2 copies of it, so I now have 3 iterations of the word. Click here. Zoom in further here. Should I just get rid of that one? I have 2 iterations of it. Okay, so I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say on page shows, I want to play from the beginning, timeline number 1. Almost done, guys, sorry. And then I'm going to go here, and I have to get one more timeline, actually. I'm going to get a multi-page timeline. And first I'm going to bring page 2 to it, and then I'm going to bring page 3. I could bring them in other orders. Then I'll bring this page. I guess I'll delete that one. We didn't use it. And then I'll bring some music in here, play it under the movies, under the cards. I don't want it to play under the movie, so I'll shorten its duration so it just plays for the first 2. I'm going to go to the first page, and I'm going to type in here, start, and I'm going to select that, and I'm going to say on mouse up, play from the beginning. And here's, which I got too fancy, didn't I? So it's 4, okay. Play number 4. And then when I click on this, it starts the timeline. And then it's going to get to page, music will stop. Okay. I hate to see when things don't work. Let's see what's happening here. Let's see timeline. Is it timeline 2? No. Timeline 3? Ah, it's timeline 3. That was why. Timeline 3. Now let's see. Anyway, I can go on and show you more things. Sophie, it really gets into, Sophie does fantastic stuff with text. It's one of the things where it's really different than every other program. You know, Flash or PowerPoint or Keynote or these presentation programs, text is a very poor cousin in all of those. You can have your text on a page, but the idea that you would have 100 pages of flowing text and you would want to have that be the spine of an argument, and you'd want to hang audio and video and time and slideshows and off of that, it doesn't exist in those programs. So it's really impossible to work with long pieces of text. That's really where Sophie starts, is as a text processor. But if anybody wants to stick around after this, I'm happy to show you some of that. But we should get to questions, I think.
How do you like Kindle or any of the other little portable electronic books? Do you think any of them are getting close to having the same satisfaction of a real book plus electronic interactivity?
I think the reading experience, literally reading, you know, my eye seeing words, it's getting pretty good. I think, and I know the Kindle did a fantastic thing by putting, you know, by making it so effortless to get things down off of the web onto the Kindle.
But if it could do,
Yeah,
if you could put your electronic book
Kindle
on
3.0?
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. I don't, this is not the, although it's getting pretty light,
Yeah.
this is not the ideal place to read.
Yeah.
My guess is we're 5 to 10 years away from, I mean, I read several hours a day on my iPhone. That's really changed my reading habits tremendously. The text looks beautiful on there. You know, if I bring my computer to bed, my girlfriend, keeps her up. But I can hide under the covers with my iPhone, you know, like the 6-year-old with the flashlight.
Yeah.
You know, it's really intimate. And, you know, I read the newspaper on there. I read all my email on there. I watch all, you know, I BitTorrent stuff, you know, from, you know, watching movies and stuff on there. It's getting book-like, but, you know, but it's sort of, it's half the size of what it needs to be. Right. You know, it needs to be this size.
Right.
But, you know, I mean, who knows? Steve Jobs may not agree that anybody's reading is worthwhile. He may not ever give us a device that's big. Somebody will.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this software open source? Or?
It's open source and it's free.
So it's hackable?
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's we'd love for you to hack it. It's coming out. Version 1.0 will be out in about 2 weeks.
Because I'm concerned about multilingual support.
It supports Unicode.
Oh, that would be perfect.
You know, and yeah, I mean, it should. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, I was in Beijing a few months ago, and you know, what people there said was, you know, we don't have a textbook industry here which has a print legacy. You know, this is perfect for us sort of to take these tools and start, you know, making, you know, building textbooks from scratch, you know, in this way, and which I think is correct. You know, it's harder here in the U.S. and the U.K., where the big textbook publishers, the last thing they want to do is cannibalize their existing business, which makes them afraid to embrace the future. And there's sort of this incredible vulnerability they have to upstarts coming along and saying, well, you know, we don't have that legacy. We'll just start from scratch.
So I was struck by your initial comments about the user driving the reading experience. And in my experience with publishers, most of them are concerned with controlling as much as possible the user experience and using technological protection measures to make sure that right now you can't skip over the FBI warning at the front of DVDs, and in the future other ways of trying to shape it, that we consume culture in exactly the way that they define. And when you see something like, you know, sticking in the Kurosawa and the other clips in there, of course, if that was on the DVD, it would be illegal to take those things off, even in an excerpt, to kind of comment upon. So where does a long way of asking, how does our current intellectual property regime run up against this desire to reshape reading and commenting?
Well, I mean, our current intellectual property regime grew up at the same time as our sense of what an author was. It all came out of, it all came out of capitalism, right? And it's it is a gigantic barrier to the remix culture that existed before then, and will certainly exist in the future. And whether, I think that it is from my perspective, these are fundamentally social and political issues, not technical issues. I mean, it's clear that, computer scientists and others have built a technical infrastructure that is completely unfriendly to the current rationale of intellectual property law. And the movie companies, the music companies, the book companies, they're all short-sightedly trying to protect themselves they're present rather than trying to figure out what we could be in a new world. It's interesting. I mean, I've just written a paper, and I'm happy to send a copy to anybody who's interested in it, called The Unified Field Theory of Publishing in the Network Era. And the reason why I called it a unified field theory was that I've been understanding for the last year or so how readers and writers are different in this network era. And I never believed the idea that we don't need publishers, that we're all just going to be our own publisher, because being a publisher, I understood that I did a lot more than just bring something to market. But I didn't really understand what the role of a publisher was. And there are a couple of several strands came together for me. About 6 months ago, I started experimenting with BitTorrents again. Several years ago when they first came out, I had two big problems. One was they never worked, and the other was there was nothing I ever wanted to read, see, or listen to that I could get. And then I found that in 3 years, everything had changed. It was incredibly easy to download anything off of BitTorrent, and almost everything, no matter how obscure, was out there. And I basically, made me believe that content is just going to be there in this big ocean of content, and that the people are not fundamentally going to pay for content. So that was in the back of my mind, and then we were starting all these network books and starting to understand how important the community that arose around the book was. And I just started to feel that the author of the future was really a seminar leader, moderator. That was one of their job descriptions, and that what I pay for as a reader is I pay to subscribe to the John Berger channel. I pay to subscribe to Who Built America, this ongoing history book. I had a fantastic lunch a few weeks ago with these two authors who'd written this brilliant Who Built America that Knopf had published. And we had published the first electronic edition with them back in the 90s. And I was talking to them about this and wanting to do a new electronic networked edition. And they were sitting at lunch, they got it. They said, oh, we have to rewrite the book in a completely new way. Because we have to write with the assumption that our readers are learning history by doing history. We've got to expect that they are now not just going to sort of be passively reading what we wrote, they're actually going to be actively involved in querying our conclusions. They're going to be going out and trying to find things which support or disprove what we've said. He gave this great example of a group of inner-city high school kids in Cleveland, Ohio, who had read something in their book, and their teacher had helped them go out and do some research where they uncovered in some newspaper file somewhere some important new documents which proved something about the historical origins of an early black trade union. And this was, he realized, oh, we have to write a book in such a way that all the readers are out doing that. And that, that starts to get, that's exciting to me. And that was when I started to realize that, okay, if that's what the role of an author is, what does a publisher do? What does an editor do? And of course, they still do what one of the things they always did, was they recognize talent, people who are worth actually putting some effort into, in terms of bringing something out into the broader world. But also building community around something requires not only know-how that we don't actually have yet, not only sort of deep mechanisms of visualization that we don't have yet, but big, big metal, big iron, infrastructure that's going to be expensive. It's going to take a lot of resources to build the right communities and the right kinds of communities around books, and to handle the subscription models and everything else. And so suddenly, after 10 years of not publishing, I'm now very excited about going back to publishing, because I really think I have a vision of what publishers, editors, agents, authors, and readers are all supposed to do in this new mix.
Did you have to get permissions for those clips that you ran of Macbeth?
Okay, I didn't actually for those, because my original partners in the Criterion Collection, which I'm not a part of anymore, they own the rights to them, and I figured they weren't going to sue me. But I'll tell you something. I feel very, very, very strongly that those 3 clips in there at their length are there under the terms of fair use.
How long are they, by the way?
They're probably 30 seconds.
Uh-huh.
There's a wonderful project I'm involved with Larry Lessig. We've been involved in it for way too long, but we're going to make it happen. John Marcuse? Maybe the wrong name. A historian who lives here in the UK. He's American, but he's lived here for 30 or 40 years. Wrote a book about Bob Dylan's lyrics called Chimes of Freedom. Long quotations from Dylan's lyrics, put out by Verso, accepted as public domain, I assume, because nobody ever bothered suing him. Larry and I've been looking for 20 years for something we could use to set a precedent for quoting from audio and video. The problem is that studios don't actually like to go to court on quotations from audio and video, because they don't actually want to lose. So it's very hard to get them to go to court to set a precedent. That's why this particular book is so perfect, because Sony and Dylan are so litigious. We think that they're not, if they let it happen, then they've actually set a precedent. And if they don't let it happen, then we'll actually get to go to court and say to a judge, well, if that was okay, why, if when I click here and just hear what's here, is that not okay? And because we think it actually is. It's a tremendous problem that writers can write about popular culture, but they can't illustrate it. It's just it's an obscene situation. So, for example, we have a site called where is this? Let's see if I can find this. futureofthebook.org/media commons. Yeah. It's a new computer. I don't have any bookmarks in here. I couldn't bring them over. Sorry. Yes, I meant media. It's Media Commons, not future of the book. So this is a new academic press, really, that we're starting in this field of media studies with some people. And every day, a professor puts a clip up here with an annotation and comments. We have a strong, I wonder if I have it here somewhere. I wonder if let's see if it's here maybe. Position on fair use. Media Commons is a strong advocate for the right of media scholars to quote from the materials they analyze, as protected by the principle of fair use. If such quotation is necessary to a scholar's argument, if the quotation serves to support a scholar's original analysis or pedagogical purpose, and if the quotation does not harm the market value of the original text, but rather on the contrary enhances it. We must defend the scholar's right to quote from the media texts under study.
So this is just for academic writing, because I wish, like when I'm reading a New Yorker review of music, I wish I could just hear
Absolutely.
what I'm reading about.
I don't think it's just for, and I don't think it's all. But also, I mean, if on television when they review a movie, they show the movie. I mean, it's which the studios consider as publicity.
Yeah,
Right.
they should.
They should. So no, the biggest problem here actually is at the universities. It's the senior councils at the universities are so afraid of being sued. That's really the absolute biggest problem, is the conservatism at this point of the university corporate councils.
I was interested by your thoughts on extending the definition of reading to include other activities, and I thought that it was very similar to watching television. I find it very hard now to watch a movie without IMDbing the actors and looking at facts on Google. And I was wondering why it is that you think that, or assume that reading and the traditional act of reading and books are going to form a central part of future leisure activity rather than the surfing aspect.
I don't.
You don't? Well, then why is your institute called the Future of the Book?
What would you
Why
call
is
it?
there still going to be a future? Why does the book still have a future?
Art object. Okay, no future, in that sense. The locus of here it's very tricky. The locus of intellectual discourse is shifting to the internet, to networked screens, not the printed pages. If I called it the Institute for the Future of Intellectual Discourse, everybody would go to sleep. I mean, it's purely branding. Okay, and the first day that somebody comes up, I mean, the Institute for the Future of Surfing, then it wouldn't be taken seriously.
But why do you think that there'll be a centralized text that's
I
still
don't.
going to?
I don't.
But even in your slides, there's still a left-hand side that's the central text, and the right-hand side that people are commenting on, rather than one.
Do you know the phrase, the best way to, one of the ways we invent the future is to reinvent the past? I mean, that's sort of what we're doing here. I had a big argument. It was a great panel, not a panel, but there were 4 speakers at a symposium on Saturday in California, and Siva Vaidyanathan was one of them. And Siva actually was arguing for the ongoing permanent prominence of the 300-page book. And for me, the 300-page book is 100% a function of the economies of scale of physical printing. And are there ideas which require 300 pages? I suppose so, but there are not many of them. But it's impossible now to look out 50 years from now at the form or 100 years, however long it takes, at the new forms which do arise. We're in this amazingly complex transitional cauldron of things happening. And in some ways, our job collectively is to nurture things that have promise. And when something is enough cooked to say, oh, wait a minute, that's a form that's worth, really getting behind it. I have no illusions about the future except that it won't look like the present. I'll tell you another project we're about to do, which from what the question you're asking me, I guess I got to find somebody to make sure people don't think I think it's the way of the future, which is that in April we're going to put up an electronic version of the Golden Notebook, Doris Lessing's novel that just won the Nobel Prize, or she just won, but that was her most important novel. And we're going to have 4 women, one 20-year-old woman, a 29-year-old woman, a 43-year-old, and a 60-year-old, and they're going to read the book in public, as it were, in the margins. And the reason why we're doing that is because we want to see if we can find some ways to encourage a culture of public reading. And it's not that I think the future is going to be 500-page novels of that form. It's interesting about the Communist Manifesto experiment. One of the problems with that thought experiment is that if Marx and Engels came along today and wrote wrote something of such importance, it almost certainly would not be a 50-page expository essay. Right? I mean, it's just impossible to believe that in today's world, that exact same form could be used to capture the imagination that piece did then. You know, whether it's a 10-minute rap poem that has, you know, text annotations added to it, who knows? I mean, but it wouldn't be that. You know, it's going to be something different. You just don't know what it is until it happens. Yeah.
Taking this Communist Manifesto thought experiment, maybe if you get these thousands of comments, what's going to happen is that you'll be able to apply labels to certain groups, and after you've applied the label, you can then ignore this group as a type of Marxist that you won't agree with anyway. And
tagging becomes profoundly important. I mean, I didn't mention today the one thing one thing I think we are going to see, and I haven't figured out how to work it into this talk yet, is when blogging first came out, when what's his name, who did the first blog? My colleague in California. He was at Swarthmore. He started. They were readers. Bloggers were readers. They were people who actually were surfing the web, seeing things that were interesting, keeping a list, and making it available to all of us. In a very short period of time, 10 years, if I say the word blogger, you don't think reader, you think writer. Bloggers are people who write. Well, I think we're going to see, in not too many years, I would think that some school of library science, information science, or maybe in conjunction with an English department or a history department, you'll start to see a new major where when you come out of school, you're a professional reader. And it's your job to go and read things, and I use read broadly, because I can be reading a movie, reading audio file, and tag it in a way that's useful to people. You know, we're going to need people who can. I mean, that was the original bloggers were so great. I mean, you know, there was too much out there, and they were showing us what to read. And it's sort of it's a form that got hijacked by writers, which is okay. I mean, a lot of blogging has been very important, but I want to find some way to go back and encourage some of the original purpose of blogging, which was actually reading.
I actually have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the user interface to Sophie and what you think is its significance? I mean, I think the only other sort of attempts at interactivity I've seen come from wikis, but I think that the thing about Sophie that's really significant to me is the ease with which you can do this, and I'm wondering if that has always been sort of at the core of what you were trying to accomplish, or if that was something that came along the way.
Say that a little bit differently.
I guess Sophie makes putting these things together remarkably easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I made the comparison to wikis because I see, you know, Panko did a wiki book and things like that. And wikis are easy to edit, but it's still not as easy as something like Sophie, and certainly to embed multimedia and embed these kinds of things. So I see that as almost the closest kind of comparison, but I don't see them as closely comparative at all. So what I'm wondering is was the ease and sort of the drag and drop nature of Sophie something that you wanted to accomplish from the beginning, or was that something that you found essential partway into the project?
It's a good question. I'm trying to think how to answer it, not fliply. My colleagues and I have one of the great things about our divide, my sort of 60-year-old divide and their 20-odd-year-old sort of perspective, is I come out of the book world. I love beautiful books. So for me, something to look beautiful is important. And so Sophie comes out of Sophie's provenance was elegant multimedia books. And so we knew that they had to look good and they had to be easy to make. So in that sense, the interface, the drag and drop, easy, it's all there. my colleagues, and I need to find some way to say this so it doesn't sound like a diss about them. I find that they don't care half as much as I do how things look. I mean, they can work in the most grungiest sort of interfaces of, client-server emails that drive me nuts. I want to keep closing my eyes. It doesn't bother them. So I make something beautiful in Sophie, and all they see is, oh, that's another CD ROM. Where is its interconnection to the web? Why can't I tag that? Why can't and they're right. I mean, fundamentally, if Sophie fails, it's going out the gate. It's going to be because its natural audience, who should be people, in the 15 to 30-year-old range, are going to feel that it is not webby enough for them. I'm hoping that there's at least a small number of people who, perhaps this man in the back, who says, I love what it can do, and I'm going to hack it to make it, more. I mean, there's, for example, there are things here that I get very excited about, where I can go up here into Sophie and say, link to a resource from a URL. If I had a URL in my head to a movie that's on a colleague's web page in Portland, I could actually embed a movie in a page of a book without the movie having to be in the book. So that means the book can be very small and compact, but it can still hold lots of audio and video. This actually is a huge difference in terms of moving stuff around.
Can you point to just a segment of a movie as well?
We can point right now to a segment of a text. Yes, the answer is yes, but not until a month from now, probably.
Okay. Same with audio, you'll be able to
you'll be able to,
yes,
you'll be able to point.
Right.
The, what was I going to say? I had an interesting point, but I mean, I for me, the ability to put the comment fields in here is important. I mean, that was sort of a, that for me, I couldn't put Sophie out without the ability to have the dynamic comment fields. It's like there are two strands. There's the web, and then there's sort of the Sophie, and I think they're going to meet in time. Not entirely sure. By the way, as I mentioned earlier, I am here in the UK half time, and I don't know you, but we're always looking for interesting collaborations, and we do have a terrific group here. One of my young colleague Mary Harrington was a student here. She's one of the readers of the Golden Notebook, and we're just keen to collaborate. We're a small group, and we like to work with others, and we do play well with others.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.